Hi everyone, I'm here today to talk to you about my 10 favourite reads from 2021. It was a very strange reading year for me, and looking back, regret some of my rating choices. So I actually want to quickly, before I go through my top 10, mention 5 honourable mentions here, because looking back now, I do this differently. So last year I rated many books 5 stars, and my top 10 are made up of only 5 stars. However, I want to quickly mention 5 books that I gave 4 stars to that I wish I'd given 5 stars, because they're up there for me. But I don't change my ratings unless I reread. So in 5th place out of these kind of honourable mentions, I've got House of Leaves by Danielewski. This is a 4-star read. I don't regret giving this 4 stars like I do some of the others, because this one was a slog. It was hard going, but it's up there for me as one of my favourite reads of last year, just because it's so different. If you aren't aware of House of Leaves, it's just, let me try and find a really good example page. Think of like Illuminate on steroids, honestly. Where's one of my favourite bits to use as an example? It goes absolutely bonkers. So there's a good bit. But this follows a few different perspectives and a house and some other things, and it's just actually impossible to explain this book. It's got footnotes that it's recommended you follow, and they tell a story in themselves, and if you don't read them, you'll probably get a different story altogether out of this. I don't know how to explain this, but I'm so incredibly happy that I picked this up last year, that I gave it a go, because it's one of those books that have been on my radar for so long now, and I had a fantastic time. I enjoyed it, but it's quite the read. It took me a couple of months, I think, like maybe 6 to 8 weeks. Not solid reading though, because I couldn't sit and read it solidly, but like an hour or so a time. It was a really amazing experience, and that's why this has made it onto the list, because it's an experience. If this is one that you're interested in, look more into it. Some people hate it, other people absolutely adore it. I'm in the adore it category. I highly recommend checking it out, but I can't tell you what it's about at this point, because I don't want to accidentally spoil anything. It's just, I find it such a difficult book to talk about. So in 4th place on this honorary list, I've got The Hatmakers by Tamsin Merchant. This was a middle grade book that I kind of picked up on a whim, and because it was on a whim, I was pleasantly surprised by it. But I assumed I was pleasantly surprised by it just because it was what I needed at the time. But it has really stuck with me incredibly much, like to the levels of a 5-star read for me. So I probably should have given this 5 stars back at the time, because it's just so fresh in my head. This is a book about a girl named Cordelia, and she comes from a family of hat makers, and they make magical hats that can do various different things. Like, you can literally decide what the hat will do, and there's loads of different kinds of magical people within this world that can make like different clothing items. And this is the first book in a series, and it blew me away, and I want to reread it this year and continue the series on. So in 3rd place on my honourable mentions, we have got Gabby, the Little Dog That Had to Learn to Bark by Barby, Keel. This is a non-fiction book that I read towards the end of last year that really just broke my heart, but also warmed my insides. So this covers many different stories within the idea of this Barb, who runs a kind of rescue centre for many animals, not just dogs. She can't help rescuing the occasional one for herself, and Gabby ends up being one of those ones. But the story doesn't just focus on Gabby, it focuses on many other experiences that she comes across while rescuing animals, and also her own health. It's a bit of a difficult read at times, but heartwarming at the same time. I just couldn't give it 5 stars because there are a few writing issues, but overall it was just phenomenal, and I loved this book a lot. Aoife, this is one for you. And no, the dog doesn't die. Next up, we have a festive one. So again, towards the end of last year, I read In a Holidaze by Christina Lauren. I actually listened to the audiobook for this, which is narrated by Patty Murin. And this was a book that I had no intention of deliberately picking up. I was just scrolling through Script early December. I was like, I want a festive audiobook. And this is what I went for. And again, I was absolutely pleasantly surprised. And I can't wait to pick up more Christina Lauren. So this one follows the idea of Groundhog Day, but at Christmas time and with a few twists. That's how I describe this book. It's not the most original of ideas, but it works so well, and it's just such a fun, festive, pleasant read that I highly recommend you pick up next December. And number one here on my absolutely honourable mentions is People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd. This was a thriller that I picked up last year that I enjoyed a heck of a lot at the time, but I didn't think would stick with me, and oh my god, did it. Oh my goodness, I regret not giving this book 5 stars so much right now. So this book follows our main character, Emmy, and she puts a very false version of her life online. She doesn't do it because she's struggling or anything. She does it purely to make money through Instagram. She would be a lot more identifiable with if she puts online that she is struggling with this aspect of having a baby or struggling with that aspect. And yeah, that's where things start. But obviously social media can be a scary thing, it can be a creepy thing, and this leads to some very unwanted attention that leads to just one of the most gripping, heartbreaking, disgusting thrillers I think I've possibly ever read, to be honest. It was a very difficult read. I think if I'd given this 5 stars, it would have been in my top 3 reads of the year level of book. So that's why I had to get this one on my honourable mentions in the number 1 slot. So now that I've done the honourable mentions, here is my 10 favourite reads from last year, kind of proper countdown, the books that I gave 5 stars to. In at number 10, we have got The Summer Queen by Elizabeth Chadwick. I listened to the audiobook of this, and so the narrator is Katie Scarfe. And this is the first book in the Eleanor of Aquitaine series. This is a historical fiction series about a person in history that I knew nothing about. I really enjoy history. I really enjoy historical fiction, and also just immersing myself in history, watching documentaries, reading non-fiction history. It's so me. But I obviously I'd heard of Eleanor, or rather I knew her as Eleanor, but it would have pronounced Eleanor, so that is what I'm going with. I knew of her, but that's literally as far as it went. I just knew the name, and so I'm having a fantastic time learning about this character, learning about the hardships that she went through. And this book was just absolutely harrowing at times, and it was just such a surprise love for me, and an obvious 5 stars to get me this one easily into number 10 slot. In at number 9, we have a graphic novel. And this is Chew Volume 1, Taster's Choice by John Layman. I had been wanting to pick up Chew for so long, and last year I finally did it, and I absolutely adored this first volume. I can't wait to jump into more, as I'm sure I love them all. Yeah, this is about a detective called Tony Chew, spelled C-H-U, not C-H-E-W, but the fun is they're all the same, isn't it? Because he can taste things and kind of work out what's happened at a crime scene from that. So he could chew on a bit of a human body to be gross, or he could eat a burger and know kind of what's happened to it along the way before it's reached his mouth, that kind of thing. And this is something that he tries to keep on the down low while he's investigating things, but it becomes forefront in this graphic novel very quickly, and he learns that perhaps he's not the only one with some sort of special tool for crime solving, and it's just a great time. I'm surprised I'm doing this at the number I'm doing it, to be honest, but in at number 8, I've got Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I flipping love this book so much, and I filmed a full spoiler-free review of it, although it wasn't as in-depth as it could have been if I'd filmed it just after I read it. Honestly, this is up there with Evelyn Hugo for me. Fantastic read. I'll leave more linked in the cards and also the description down below, so you can check out me gushing about this for just a solid 10 minutes. This follows the Reaver family. So Mick Reaver is mentioned in Evelyn Hugo, and this follows his kids and the beginning of their lives and the hardships and some insane party that we know is going to go terribly wrong from the outset. That's all I'm going to say. Historical fiction, but not in the same sort of level that Eleanor of Aquitaine, obviously. So possibly a bit more accessible to those that aren't quite as into their historical fiction. Next up, we have one that I have the physical copy of, but I don't know what I've done with it. Like, I looked for it, can't find it, never mind. So next up is The Extinction Trials by S.M. Wilson. This is one that was marketed as The Hunger Games meets Jurassic Park. I can totally go along with that. I agree with that full-heartedly. I don't think it's quite as easily pull you in or as well written as The Hunger Games, but the dinosaur aspect really still helped keep it up there for me. It was just so much fun, so interesting. Again, just tapping into one of those kind of childhood obsessions with dinosaurs that really pulled me in and kept my attention. And the Hunger Games aspect was done with such a twist enough that it didn't feel copycatty. In at number 6, we have The Wallflower Wager, which is the third book in the Girl Meets Duke series by Tessa Dare. This book was just so much fun. This character loves animals, and so you had the fun of the historical romance side of things thrown in with just like dogs and other animals, and it's just so lovely and so wholesome and just such a delight, absolute delight to read. Just one of those fun things to help break up your reading. In at number 5, we have got the first book in that series, which is The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare, and this one had to rank just a little bit higher than The Wallflower Wager because obviously this one was the original one from the series and it was just so much fun, and the characters were a bit more lovable in this one. Like, it didn't just help make it onto the 5-star list because of cute animals, because this one doesn't have that. This one's more about just the love, the intense spark between these two characters. I had such a fantastic time reading this. So in at number 4 on this list, we have got The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Yes, last year was the first time that I had picked up The Hunger Games. I know I was very late to that party, but I did also read The Extinction Trials, as I mentioned, so I ticked off both of those boxes because they are both featuring in my 5-star predictions video from forever ago. So eventually we might actually be able to complete the resolution to that video. Wouldn't that be a treat? But yeah, I absolutely loved The Hunger Games, as I thought I would. It was no real surprise here, and at this point there's nothing new to say about The Hunger Games that hasn't already been said. I did vlog my experience reading The Hunger Games for the first time, so if you're curious, I will leave that linked in the cards and the description down below if I remember, because well worth checking out someone's first ever reactions to the various plot aspects. That is obviously full of spoilers. In at number 3 on this list then, I've got A Question Mark Is Half a Heart by Sophia Lundberg. This was a real surprise read for me. This was just a book that I'd picked up randomly off NetGalley, and I'd picked it up literally because the author was Swedish and I was looking to read some more Swedish literature because I lived in Sweden at one time, and this was just so beautiful. So it's a dual timeline novel where you follow our main character Elin, and she was born in Sweden and then she moves to New York. She's got a wonderful partner, a wonderful daughter. She's really happy, but there are some old secrets that kind of threaten to tear things apart, and so she has to explore these things and go back home, and it's just such a twisty journey. And first of all, this is a translated novel, so it did make the writing a little bit jarring in places, and there were a few little pacing issues, but overall I overlooked all those things because this book blew me away. And at number 2 then, we have got The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This was the first book that I picked up last year. What a first book to start the year on. I picked this up totally randomly. It was just the first book I needed to get to, and yeah, it was a really pleasant surprise. So this is a thriller that kind of takes Jane Eyre and puts it on a complete twist and changes quite a few things. But there are some aspects of Jane Eyre kind of tweaked into this. And I read this book in a day. It was truly addictive. And I just don't get to read enough books in a day. I mean, it helps to have the time, but the time on top of just the fact that I could not put this book down has got this book so highly rated for me. Honestly, it was just a real nail biter. Like, I have memories of sitting biting my nails while reading this book. I just couldn't stop. So absolutely, like, if you've not read this book, highly recommend. I've got another Rachel Hawkins book that's coming out soon to read soon, so I am super excited to be getting to that. Keep your eyes open for that coming up in the next couple of months. So in the number one spot, this was a no-brainer for me. This book disturbed me in every single way. This is The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean. This is not an easy read by any means. It stuck with me so much, I can't even begin to explain. It's just, oh, it was gruesome, honestly. It's not the sort of book you go around recommending to everyone, but at the same time, I wish I could. So this is a story of a young woman who has ended up being separated from her sister as they came to the UK via an illegal traffic ring. People in charge of the traffic ring play a huge part in the story, and you don't want to know too much about that because it would be quite kind of spoilery. But the women characters in this book are really strong fighters who you want to win at every turn, and the male character honestly made me sick to my stomach. An incredibly difficult book to read, stomach churning, honestly made me struggle not to throw up at times. But yeah, such an important read. Like, oh, this book's just stayed with me so much because of the importance and the relevance that this book has had. There's also descriptions of absolutely horrific injuries. There's physical abuse, sexual abuse, difficult scenes of suffering, both related to adults and also a baby. I honestly don't remember struggling to read anything else to this extent. I don't struggle an awful lot normally, but this one was up there, and this is why I was upset that I hadn't given people like her 5 stars, because it was up there with this for me in the grossness aspect and the horror and the thriller and everything combined in both of these of just, you need to pick this book up and people like her. But this one would still be the number one even if I was counting that one in this whole list. This was my number one read for last year. It was just everything it needed to be. And it's quite a short read too. It's not a horridly long, drag out, struggle to get through kind of experience. And yeah, wow. What a reading year I had last year. It felt like I'd read nothing decent at all. But then when I started looking into making this video, I was like, oh, actually, I read some amazing books last year. And I hope that 2022 brings more surprises and amazing reads for me. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe by clicking the image of me if you want to see more book reviews and other bookish content from me, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.